Everyone thinks they know what home feels like. Safe, familiar, unshakable. But what do you do when the sound that wakes you in the morning is not birdsong or wind through the grass? What if it is the roar of diesel engines outside your window? Shot out of bed before I even knew what I was doing. The sky was still gray. My heart was already pounding. I pressed my face against the glass, and what I saw made my stomach fall straight through the floor. A bulldozer. Its blade carving into the fence my grandfather had built with his own hands more than a century ago. That fence was not just wood. It was memory. It was history. Each oak post was cut by hand. Each section placed with care to follow the rolling lines of our land. Since 1875, my family had repaired it after every storm. We had protected it the way you protect something sacred. But now it was being torn down like it was nothing more than junk lumber. I didn't even grab my boots. I ran barefoot across gravel that cut into my feet. My voice tore from my throat before my mind could even catch up. "Stop! Get off my land!" My words bounced uselessly off the bulldozer glass. The operator barely glanced at me. He just pointed toward a woman standing next to a spotless white pickup truck. She looked like she had walked straight out of some corporate office in Dallas. Black suit, clipboard, cold eyes that did not belong out here on ranch land. She smiled at me like a shark that had just smelled blood. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "this is a legally approved easement. We are allowed to build this road whether you like it or not. And you should be thanking me. We are about to increase your property value. Thank her. Thank her while the history of my family was being shredded into dust." I stared at her in disbelief. My rage was so sharp I could barely form words. She waved papers in my face. Official-looking, county seals, stamps. She spoke slow, like she was talking to a child. "I have every right to do this. The paperwork is in order. You have no legal ground to stop us." Her tone was worse than her words, like I was too ignorant to understand what was happening on my own land. My fists shook. My jaw clenched. I pulled out my phone and called the police. But while I waited, I could not stand still. I gathered whatever wood and barbed wire I could. Find. I hammered together a barrier across the new strip of asphalt they had already laid down. I painted signs that said private property, no trespassing. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely drive the nails. But I refused to stand by and do nothing. The police came, their lights flashing against the ruined fence line. I thought they would stop her, that they would protect what was mine. Instead, they looked at her papers like she had handed them the Constitution. "Looks legitimate to me, sir." That was all they said. My land, my blood, my history. And they told me to prove I even owned it. That night, I stood in the wreckage of my fence, the smell of diesel still thick in the air. I could feel the weight of generations pressing on my shoulders. And then a delivery truck pulled into my drive. The driver handed me a thick envelope. My name stamped in black ink across the front. My hands trembled before I even tore it open. Inside was a lawsuit. The HOA demanding $25,000 in damages. Suing me for blocking their so-called easement. Suing me for trying to protect my own land. My eyes blurred as I read the words. They wanted damages, court costs, daily fines of $500 for every day I put up any kind of barrier. The paper shook in my grip. My chest felt hollow. This ranch had carried my family through the Civil War, through the Depression, through droughts that turned the earth to stone. And now a woman with a clipboard and a fake smile was threatening to take it all away. I could still hear my grandfather's voice in my head, his warnings. "Never trust anyone who comes for your land, Cameron. They will use tricks you have never seen. They will smile while they steal everything you love." Standing there under the Texas sky, I finally understood what he meant. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But mostly I felt something colder than all of that. I felt fear, because I knew this was only the beginning. Everyone thinks the fight begins in the courtroom, But the truth is, it begins long before that. It begins in the silence of your house when you are staring at papers that tell you your life is no longer your own. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the lawsuit spread out in front of me. The words blurred. My hands gripped the edges until the wood creaked. I kept asking myself, how could this even be real? The bulldozers were gone. The woman with the clipboard was gone. But her voice echoed in my skull. You have no idea what is coming next. She had said it like a promise, like a threat. And I believed her. I needed help. But who would fight an HOA? Who would take on a battle that looked unwinnable? I called lawyer after lawyer. Most said no before I even finished my story. Some laughed. Others told me to settle before I lost everything. Each rejection felt like another nail in the coffin of my family's legacy. Then someone gave me a name, William Davis, a property lawyer who had once taken on an HOA of his own. They had tried to shut down his workshop. He had beaten them, and he had never forgiven them for what they put him through. Walking into his office felt like stepping into a war room. Papers stacked to the ceiling, coffee stains on files, books so worn they looked like they had been dragged through battles of their own. William looked me in the eye, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fire instead of fear. This is not just about your ranch, he said. This is about stopping them from steamrolling every family between here and Dallas. If we do not stop them now, they will take every acre they can touch. His voice was calm but sharp, like steel. He looked at Jillian's so-called easement. His brow furrowed almost instantly. He tapped the notary seal. Too perfect, he muttered. Why would your grandfather sign this right before he died? That makes no sense. Then he found the clause, buried deep in the document. Grantor maintains right to revoke easement with 30 days' notice. If this was real, my grandfather could have canceled it at any time. For the first time, a crack appeared in the wall they had built around me. But William was not smiling. He was frowning harder. Something is off, he said. Something is very wrong with this. While he studied the papers, I felt the pressure of Jillian closing in. Every morning, new violation notices arrived like clockwork. $500 a day, she wrote. Each notice another knife to the chest. I built barriers. She fined me. I tore them down. I recorded everything with cameras. Watching strangers drive across land that had been ours for 5 generations made me sick. Neighbors drove past. Some stared. Some looked away. Their silence was worse than their stares. It was the silence of people who had already given up, who were too afraid to stand by me. William shook his head as I told him. They are trying to break you before court. It is the oldest trick, psychological warfare. Make you believe you are already beaten. But we are not beaten. Not yet. Then he found the proof. Death records. Dates. My grandfather had died in December 1982, but the easement was notarized in March 1985. 2 years after his death. My hands went cold. He could not have signed it. It was impossible. William leaned back, his face pale but determined. This might be the break we need. Your grandfather could not have signed this. This document is a lie. That night, I lay awake. The ceiling above me felt heavy. I remembered my grandfather on the porch, his coffee cup in his hands, his voice rough from years of work. Never trust anyone. Who wants your land, Cameron? They will smile. They will trick. They will take. His words were no longer lessons. They were warnings from beyond the grave. The next morning, William brought in a handwriting expert, a doctor who studied forgeries in federal cases. She spread out papers across the desk, authentic signatures, the fake one. She pointed out the traced lines, the hesitation marks. This is not authentic. This was forged. Whoever did this was skilled, but it is still a forgery. My stomach twisted as her words sank in. Someone had faked my grandfather's name to steal our land. Not just sloppy corruption, a deliberate crime. William dug deeper. County records. Other families. What he found made my blood run cold. 4 other ranches, all with easements signed years after the supposed owners had already died. The same pattern, the same scam, the same theft. We visited one of them, Elena Rodriguez, 72 years old. A woman who had once fed half her neighborhood with her garden. The HOA bulldozed it for their road. She thought she was signing papers to help children. They laughed when she asked for her land back. Her voice shook as she told us. I signed paper thinking I helped community. Now my garden gone forever. I left her kitchen with rage boiling so hot I could hardly breathe. This was not about one ranch. This was about predators hunting the most vulnerable in our community. They picked the elderly, the grieving, the ones, without money for lawyers. They picked them off one by one, and now it was my turn. Jillian's smile replayed in my mind. That cold voice. You have no idea what is coming next. And for the first time I believed her, because this fight was bigger than I had ever imagined. Everyone says the truth will set you free, but the truth can also trap you, because once you see it, you can never unsee it. And the truth we were uncovering was darker than I ever imagined. William spread the forged documents across his desk. The expert reports, the death records, the evidence of fraud was undeniable. But he warned me, evidence does not always equal victory. Not when the people you are fighting have money, power, and friends in places that matter. Meanwhile, Jillian was tightening the noose. Every morning, a new violation notice. Every day, another threat of fines. Neighbors who once waved now drove past without even looking at me. Some whispered that I was selfish, that I was blocking community progress. Jillian had poisoned the well, with her meetings and her lies. She painted me as the villain while she tore apart my family's history. At night, I walked the ruined fence line, watching headlights cross my land like it was a highway. Strangers driving where cattle once grazed. My stomach twisted with shame. I felt like I was failing every ancestor who had bled and sweated to protect this place. I started digging through the attic, dust thick on boxes that had not been touched in decades. My grandmother's recipes, old tax papers, family photographs, and then I found it. A shoebox tucked under yellowed newspapers. Inside was my grandfather's original will, dated 1982, the year he died. I opened it with trembling hands. His handwriting scratched across the pages. A clause leapt out like fire. This land shall never be subject to easements, without unanimous consent of all living heirs, and such consent must be renewed every 10 years. My breath caught in my chest. My grandfather had foreseen this exact battle. He had written protections into his will, and because the will had never been processed by probate court, it was still legally valid. That meant the easement Jillian was waving around was impossible from the start. For the first time, I felt hope. Real hope. I gripped that will like it was a weapon forged by my ancestors. But deep down a voice whispered, "This cannot be the end. This is too easy," and I was right. The very next morning, a paper slid under my door. A new document. A new threat. It was as if Jillian could smell when I had hope, and she was determined to crush it before it could grow. William studied the will. His face was serious. "This gives us ground to fight back," he said. "But once we move forward, there is no turning back. Filing a motion to dismiss their lawsuit and countersuing for fraud will be like declaring war, and people this desperate do not go down quietly." Wanted to believe courage would be enough, but the fear was real. Fear that this battle would not just take my ranch, it would take my life. That fear deepened when William set up a meeting with a whistleblower, someone inside the county who had been watching the corruption from the shadows. We met at midnight in an abandoned gas station 15 miles from town, the kind of place you see in crime films where things go badly fast. The employee handed William a thick envelope, their voice a whisper. These people have power everywhere. Courthouse, police, even the newspaper. They will ruin me if they know. I talked. Then they vanished into the night. Inside the envelope were transcripts, closed-door county meetings, documents showing Commissioner Jake Morrison fast-tracking easement approvals without review, dozens of them, all tied to the same development company. Approvals signed within 24 hours when normal review took months. The pattern was clear. This was not incompetence. This was corruption. Morrison's wife was listed as a consultant for the development company, 6-figure payments for work nobody could explain. I felt my knees weaken as the truth sank in. We were not just fighting a ruthless HOA president. We were fighting a network of corruption that reached into government itself. But William's eyes lit with fire. This is bigger than we thought, he said. But it also means we have them. If we can prove this in court, their whole scheme collapses. Jillian must have sensed the tide shifting. One evening, her white pickup pulled into my drive. She stepped out, holding a briefcase. Her smile was gone, her eyes sharp with calculation. She offered me $100,000 in cash, and a promise that the road would only be used for emergencies. "End this tonight, Cameron," she said. "Be practical." I looked at her. At the destruction she had already caused. At the lies, the forged documents, the neighbors she had turned against me. I refused, and her mask fell away. Her voice dropped to a whisper that felt colder than steel. "You have no idea who you are fighting. We have resources beyond your imagination. We have destroyed bigger obstacles than you. This is your last chance to walk away while you still can." I watched her drive off into the night. Gravel spitting from her tires. My body shook, but it was not fear anymore. It was resolve. She had declared war, and I was ready to fight. That night, I walked the property line, the same ground my grandfather had walked. I heard his voice in the wind. "This land chooses its people, son. It will fight for those who belong here, but only if they fight first." I stood under the stars with the will in my hand, with the weight of generations on my shoulders, and I swore that no matter how dark this fight became, I would not give up, because some things are worth more than money, more than comfort, even more than safety. This land was worth everything, and I would fight for it until my last breath. Everyone believes justice lives inside a courtroom, that if you just tell the truth, everything will be all right. But the first time I stepped into that courthouse, I realized how wrong that belief can be, because the truth is fragile when money and power are twisting every word. HOA had brought in Sterling and Associates, a law firm from Dallas with a reputation for crushing small landowners into dust. Their lead attorney, Marcus Sterling, walked into the room like he owned the place. Silver hair, designer suit, eyes sharp as knives. He carried himself like he had already won. His opening words painted me as a dangerous man. A selfish rancher blocking emergency services. A threat to innocent families. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had lied so many times that lies had become his truth. He held up charts, color-coded maps, traffic studies, emergency reports. All of it designed to make me look like a criminal. Judge Williams listened, her face unreadable, but my stomach twisted with every polished phrase. He delivered. He told the court that if an ambulance was delayed by even 1 second because of me, a life could be lost, and that blood would be on my hands. For a moment, I wondered if this was it, if all my ancestors had fought for would be erased by a single speech. I wanted to shout, to protest, but William gripped my arm. "Wait," he whispered. "Let them finish, then watch." When our turn came, William rose slowly. No theatrics, no flash, just quiet confidence. He spread authentic county records across the table. He called real emergency officials to the stand, fire chiefs, ambulance directors. Each one testified. None of them had ever requested access through my ranch. None had ever been delayed. In fact, the two existing access roads were faster than anything cutting through my land. The courtroom air shifted. The lies Sterling had built his case on began to crumble under the weight of hard evidence. The judge leaned closer, her eyes narrowing, at the charts that suddenly looked like toys instead of facts. Then came the moment I will never forget. William called Jillian to the stand. She walked with her usual poise, her dark suit pressed, her hair neat, her smile practiced. She swore under oath that she had no financial interest in the easements. She said she served only for community benefit. Her voice calm, sincere, convincing. But William was waiting. He opened a folder. Inside were bank records, payments totaling $280,000 from Loner Development directly to Jillian over the last 3 years, plus stock shares in the very company building the subdivision. He placed the papers in front of her. The silence in the courtroom was so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat. Jillian's confident mask cracked. Her voice trembled. Those were legitimate consulting fees, she stammered. But nobody believed her anymore. The truth was there in black and white. The judge's face hardened. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras clicked. The room buzzed with shock. Jillian tried to shift blame, tried to redirect. But each word only dug her deeper. The image of control she had built for months shattered in seconds. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the weight shift. The predator had been caught in her own trap. William pressed harder. He showed how identical forged easements had been used against other families. He showed my grandfather's death records proving he could not have signed. Piece by piece, the case against us dissolved into dust. But victory in court did not mean safety. That night, I stood on my porch staring at the horizon. Shadows moved near the property line. A figure stood watching. My chest tightened. This was no longer just about documents. This was intimidation. This was a warning. I stepped toward the figure, gravel crunching under my boots, my fists clenched. Then a voice cut through the darkness. "You are not going to win this fight, Cameron." The words chilled me more than the night air. When I blinked, the figure was gone. Sleep never came easy after that. I kept hearing my grandfather's voice. This land chooses its people, but only if they fight for it. I had proof of fraud. I had cracks in their case. But now I knew they would not stop at legal tricks. They would fight dirty. They would come after me any way they could. The next morning, William called, his voice steady but urgent. "We are not just defending anymore, Cameron. We are going on the offensive. We are going to counter-sue. Fraud, conspiracy, corruption. If we win this, we bring down not just Jillian, but the entire machine behind her." His words gave me strength, but they also filled me with dread. Because a man once told me something I will never forget. When you corner a predator, it does not surrender. It lashes out, and what came next would prove him right. Everyone thinks the worst blows come in court. But the truth is, the worst blows come when you are alone, when the lights are off, when you realize they are not just trying to take your land, they are trying to break you. The first sign came at William's office. One Tuesday night, his locks were picked, his files scattered across the floor, nothing stolen, nothing missing, just chaos left behind like a calling card. A warning, back off or worse will follow. The security camera had been spray-painted black. Whoever did it was professional. This was not random. This was intimidation. William called it harassment, but I knew what it really was. A promise. They were telling us we were getting too close to something they did not want exposed. Then came the whispers about Commissioner Morrison. Every easement in the last 5 years signed without hearings, all approved in record time. His wife on payroll for the very company stealing our land. Six-figure consulting fees for work that never existed. The money trail was there. William said it was enough to bring down not just Jillian, but the county commissioner himself. But Jillian was not sitting quietly. She showed up at my ranch again. Not with papers this time. With a man built like a wall standing beside her, his eyes cold, his hands resting near whatever weapon was under his jacket. She said, "This is your final warning, Mr. Hayes. If you keep harassing our board, I will file trespassing charges against you." Her voice was ice, but her guard said nothing. He did not have to. His silence was louder than her words. Neighbors started to distance themselves even more. I saw fear in their faces. Some crossed the street when I walked through town. Others pretended not to see me at the post office. Jillian was spreading rumors that I was dangerous, that I was blocking progress, that I cared more about fence posts than the safety of children. It was working. The isolation grew heavier each day. Nights were worse. Shadows moved outside the barn. Headlights slowed near my driveway. Every creak of the old ranch house made me wonder if someone was inside. I was tempted to take her offer. $100,000. Enough to buy land somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere free of this nightmare. But then I thought of my grandfather. His words. Never trust anyone who wants your land. They will use every trick. Even tricks not yet written in any book. So I stood firm, even as the pressure mounted, even as legal bills stacked higher than I could pay. Every morning another envelope. Every night another threat. William suggested we go bold. Counter-sue. Not just defend, attack, expose the fraud, show the forged signatures, show the corruption in the county, turn the tables. The risks were heavy. If we lost, we would not just owe the damages, we would owe their legal costs. Sterling and Associates did not come cheap. Losing could mean financial ruin. The ranch gone, the legacy gone, everything erased. But standing still was not an option. So we prepared for war. Then came the rally. Elena Rodriguez, the woman who had lost her garden. She stood on courthouse steps, her hands shaking but her voice strong. She told the world what they had done to her. Others joined, families who had been silenced by fear. For the first time, I was not alone. People gathered with signs, reporters asked questions, donations poured in for a legal defense fund, $45,000 in 10 days. Standing with them, I felt a surge of strength I had not felt in months. This fight was no longer just about me. It was about all of us. About every family that had been stolen from, about every neighbor who had been bullied into silence. But Jillian struck back harder. She launched a petition, 40 signatures demanding. I stopped blocking community progress. The local newspaper ran an editorial calling me a stubborn rancher who hated change. The narrative twisted until I was painted as the villain again. At night, the threats escalated. A figure on the edge of the property, a voice from the shadows. "You are not going to win this, Cameron." Then gone, like smoke. I could not eat. I could not sleep. My hands shook when I tried to do simple chores. The ranch felt less like a home and more like a battlefield. My sanctuary had become a cage. William kept pushing forward. He showed me documents proving Loner Development had bought 12 parcels of land surrounding my ranch for 20% below market value. None of it made sense until he explained. My land was the missing piece. Without the road through my ranch, their entire subdivision was worthless. With it, they stood to make $50 million. Suddenly, Jillian's obsession made perfect sense. She was not just protecting her community, she was chasing profit beyond anything we could imagine, and that meant she would never stop. Not until she either owned my land or destroyed me completely. One night, I stood on the fence line staring into the dark, my body exhausted, my spirit nearly broken, and I asked myself a question I never thought I would ask. Was I being stubborn, or was I being brave? Was I protecting my family legacy, or was I destroying it by refusing to bend? The answer came not from me, but from the memory of my grandfather's voice carried on the wind. This land chooses its people. It fights for those who fight for it. And I knew then, no matter the cost, I would fight. Everyone thinks the fight ends when you get your day in court. But the truth is, that is when the real war begins. Because inside that courtroom, every lie they have told is dressed up as truth. Every trick is polished to look like justice. And every weakness you carry is waiting to be exposed. The emergency hearing was set. Sterling himself walked in with the confidence of a man who had crushed 100 families before mine. His team carried charts and binders like weapons. They presented fake traffic studies, fabricated emergency service reports, even hired witnesses who claimed they feared ambulances would not reach them because of me. Watching them lie so smoothly made my stomach twist. They had rehearsed this, perfected it. They knew exactly how to turn neighbors into actors in their play. Judge Williams listened. At first she seemed convinced, her eyes heavy on me, her voice sharp. If your actions prevent emergency services from saving lives, this court must prioritize safety over property. Her words cut deep. For a moment I felt the walls closing in, felt the weight of every ancestor pressing down. Was I about to lose everything right here? But William rose, calm, steady. His voice carried no theatrics, just truth. He presented county maps, real records. He called fire chiefs and ambulance directors who swore under oath that no delay had ever existed. That 2 other routes were faster. That no one had ever requested access through my ranch. Piece by piece, the false wall they had built crumbled. Then William turned his gaze to Jillian. He called her to the stand. She walked forward, like nothing could touch her. She swore she had no financial interest. She said she worked only for the community, her voice soft, convincing. But William was ready. He dropped bank records onto the table. $280,000 in payments, stock shares, direct ties to the very company stealing our land. The silence in that courtroom was electric. Jillian's smile faltered. Her words stumbled. Those payments were consulting fees, she whispered. But the truth was written clear in every number. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge leaned forward. The mask Jillian had worn for months was cracking in real time. I felt my chest swell with something I had not felt in weeks. Hope. But hope is dangerous. Because predators fight hardest when they are cornered. And Jillian was cornered. That night, shadows moved outside my barn again. My dogs barked wild. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the night. At the far edge of the property, a figure stood watching. My voice shook as I shouted, "Who is there?" The figure did not move. Then words drifted across the dark. "You are not going to win, Cameron." Then silence. Then gone. Sleep abandoned me. Every sound made me jump. Every creak felt like danger. I realized this was not just legal war anymore. This was survival. William's investigation grew deeper. He uncovered proof that Commissioner Morrison's wife had been paid hundreds of thousands for fake consulting. He tied those payments to every fraudulent easement. He showed how the commissioner had approved them in days without hearings. Corruption carved into the very foundation of our county. The evidence was a bomb. But bombs draw attention. William warned me. Once we file this countersuit, we will become their #1 target. They will try to bury us in ways you cannot imagine. He was right. Because the very next day, Jillian herself showed up again. Not with papers, not with offers, with threats. She stood in my driveway, her face hard as stone. "You do not know who. You are fighting Cameron. We have resources. We have destroyed bigger people than you. This is your last chance to walk away." My voice shook as I answered. This land is not for sale, not for trade, not for you. She leaned closer, her whisper cut like ice. Then you will be buried with it. I watched her drive away, gravel spitting under her tires. My knees trembled, my chest ached. But I did not break. Because I remembered my grandfather's words. This land chooses its people. It fights for those who belong. And I belonged. The next morning, William told me federal investigators had taken interest. Reporters were digging. Neighbors who once stayed silent were starting to talk. Elena stood again on courthouse steps and said, "What they did to me, they will do to you unless you fight." Others nodded. Others joined. But Jillian was not done. She launched a media blitz. She sat on local television in her dark suit, claiming I was blocking progress, claiming I was endangering children. Her lies spread faster than the truth. For a moment, it felt like we were losing again. Then William showed me something that made my blood boil and my spirit rise at the same time. Lonier Development had paid 20% under market value for every property around my ranch. 12 parcels in total. And without my land, they were worthless. With it, they stood to make $50 million. That was the reason for every forged signature, every threat, every lie. $50 million. I walked the fence line that night. The stars above me, the earth solid beneath my boots, my grandfather's voice echoing in my ears. This land will fight if you fight. And I knew then the war was far from over, because predators may be powerful, but sometimes power blinds them to one truth. Some people cannot be bought, and some land cannot be stolen. Everyone believes villains fall quickly once the truth comes out. But the truth is they fight harder than ever. Because when power slips from their fingers, desperation takes its place, and desperation is dangerous. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches. Neighbors stood in the back whispering. Judge Williams sat high above us, her face stern. Sterling and his team presented their polished lies once again. Charts, reports, actors pretending to be concerned citizens. They made it sound like I was a reckless outlaw standing in the way of public safety. But William was patient. He let them talk, let them spin their story. Then he rose and began to dismantle every piece. He called the fire chief who testified no emergency service had ever needed access through my ranch. He called the ambulance director who swore existing. Roads were faster. He laid county maps across the table showing 2 clear routes already in place. Each word from our side pulled bricks from their wall until nothing held it together. Then William called Jillian again. She walked to the stand with her chin high, her voice sweet. "I have never taken a dime for myself," she said. "I serve only the community. I want only safety and progress." She looked at the judge with practiced sincerity. But William had been waiting. He pulled out new evidence. Bank records showing payments not just to Jillian, but to accounts tied directly to her personal investments. $280,000 over 3 years. Plus, stock in the very company building the subdivision. The courtroom gasped. Jillian's face cracked. Her eyes darted. She stammered. Consulting fees, business advice. But her voice shook. Reporters scribbled. Cameras clicked. The judge's expression hardened. The mask she had worn so long was gone. William pressed harder. He presented the death records proving my grandfather had been dead 2 years before the easement was signed. He showed identical forged documents used against 4 other families. He brought Elena to testify about her destroyed garden. Her voice broke as she spoke, but her courage filled the room. By the time William finished, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Sterling looked rattled. Jillian's hands trembled on the witness stand. For the first time, I felt the tide turning, fully in our favor. But predators do not fall quietly. Jillian's desperation was rising. She tried to shift blame. She claimed other board members had acted without her. She claimed Commissioner Morrison was the mastermind. She even tried to paint herself as a victim. I was manipulated, she said. I was threatened. I was forced. But the federal investigators had already arrived. Warrants in hand, they had seized her financial records. They had traced the payments. The lies only added to the charges. Fraud, conspiracy, perjury, obstruction of justice. Each word another nail in her coffin. Still she fought. Her lawyers argued. They begged the judge to consider public safety. They tried to bury us in motions and technicalities. But William stood firm, calm, steady. Each time they attacked, he countered with facts, with truth, with the strength of evidence too solid to shake. The judge finally spoke. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. This court has heard enough. The HOA lawsuit is dismissed. All costs are to be paid by the plaintiff. Punitive damages will be considered for what this court views as malicious and fraudulent actions. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder. We had won. But victory did not feel like joy. It felt like exhaustion, like the weight of months of fear finally pressing down all at once. I stumbled out of the courtroom into the bright sun, my legs weak, my chest tight, the crowd around me buzzing with shock and relief. Federal agents placed Jillian in handcuffs before the courthouse doors, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She glanced at me once. Gone was the cold smile. Gone was the shark's confidence. What I saw instead was fear, and it was almost enough to make me pity her. Almost. But then I remembered the fence, the bulldozers, Elena's garden, the neighbors silenced, the threats whispered in the night. Pity had no place here. Commissioner Morrison was taken too. His financial records laid bare, payments to his wife traced directly to Lonier Development. Years of corruption exposed in a single afternoon. His career ended not with applause, but with handcuffs. As I stood there, reporters pushed microphones toward me. What do you feel, Cameron? What comes next? Their voices blurred. My mind drifted back to my grandfather, to his words on the porch. Never trust anyone who wants your land. They will use every trick. They will take every chance. Unless you fight, we had fought, and we had won. But the scars of that battle would never leave me. That night I walked the ranch. The fence line broken, but standing strong in spirit. The stars above me bright. The earth solid beneath my boots. I whispered into the wind. We did it, Grandpa. We did it. But even in that moment of victory, a shadow remained, because villains rarely accept defeat. And Jillian still had one desperate card left to play. Everyone thinks the story ends when the gavel falls. But the truth is, battles like these never end so neatly. Because corruption does not die easy. It claws, it clings, it drags down as many as it can before the final fall. Jillian was cornered. Federal agents had her bank records. They had the forged easements. They had testimony from families she had ruined. But even with her world collapsing, she still tried one last move. She stood in front of the judge, her hands shaking, but her voice steady enough to carry. I was misled, she claimed. Other board members forged the documents. I only signed what they told me. I was another victim. Please understand. But nobody believed her. The prosecutors had traced every dollar, every signature, every connection. Her words only added perjury to the growing list of crimes: conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, obstruction. The list read like the charges of an organized crime boss. When the verdict came, she was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, ordered to pay $600,000 in restitution to the families she had hurt. Morrison was sentenced too, 2 years behind bars and a lifetime ban from public office. His wife lost her consulting contracts and faced civil lawsuits of her own. The HOA board was dissolved under federal supervision. Every fraudulent easement declared void, every acre returned to its rightful family. Elena's garden space was restored. She planted tomatoes again. She cried as she held fresh peppers in her hands. For her, it was not just food, it was dignity returned. On my ranch, the road was torn up. Bulldozers came again, but this time to heal instead of destroy. Crews replanted oak trees where my grandfather once had. Craftsmen rebuilt the fence with the same methods used in the 1870s. Watching each post sink into the ground felt like watching history repair itself. Like the land was breathing again. Lonier Development collapsed within 6 months. Bankrupt. Their subdivision dream crumbled to dust. Every property they had stolen was returned. New county laws were passed to prevent any scheme like this from ever happening again. The court awarded me $78,000 in legal costs and $50,000 in damages, enough to cover the debt that had nearly buried me. But money was not the true victory. The true victory was knowing my grandfather's fence line would stand for another century, that the land had been protected, that the family legacy still lived. With part of the settlement, I created a legal defense fund, a shield for families too poor to hire lawyers when predators came with forged papers and lies. No family should stand alone against forces like these, not while I had breath to fight. The sweetest justice came half a year later. Jillian's own luxury home foreclosed, built on land she had stolen, sold at auction. I bought it with money she had been forced to pay. Then I donated it to the county to house veterans. A home that had been born of greed now served those who had given everything for their country. It felt like balance. 6 months after the nightmare began, I stood at sunset on the restored ranch. The oak saplings lined the fence line once again. The air smelled of dust and grass. I closed my eyes and I swear I heard my grandfather's voice, on the wind. You did good, boy. You fought. You held the line. This land knew you would. At Elena's harvest celebration, children laughed as they carried baskets of vegetables. She pressed tomatoes into my hands and said, "Now my grandchildren know what justice looks like. They will remember that good people can win." I looked around at those children playing, their faces glowing in the dusk, and I realized this fight had always been about more than land. It was about dignity, about community, about proving that ordinary people could stand together and defeat greed. The scars remain. The fear lingers in quiet corners of memory. But so does the strength. Because I learned something through this fire. Some things are worth more than money. Some things are worth more than safety. Some things are worth every sacrifice you can give. This ranch has survived the Civil War, the Depression, droughts that nearly killed it, and now it has survived corruption dressed as progress. The posts in the ground are more than wood. They are markers of legacy. They are proof that some lines are never meant to be crossed. As long as Hayes' blood runs, this ranch will stand. For another 150 years, maybe longer. Because land like this is not just dirt. It is memory. It is sacrifice. It is family. And no amount of money or power can ever change that truth. So if you are hearing this story, remember one thing. When someone comes for what you love, you have a choice. You can surrender, or you can stand. And sometimes standing is enough to make history itself stand with you. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one.